this is Surya Saha and welcome to the Insurance Story podcast, and we are available on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon Music, Audible and YouTube. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic, which is cyber insurance beyond ransomware. And with that, I welcome our guest for the day, John Pennick, who is the Financial Risk Director and member of the board at Barclay Insurance Group UK Limited. John is a highly experienced financial risk director specializing in professional indemnity, cyber, and other specialist insurance with over 30 years of expertise. He advises businesses on managing and ensuring financial, legal, and regulatory risk, offering practical advice and in-house training. John is a market leader in cyber insurance and a founding member and chairman of the British Insurance Brokers Association's Cyber Focus Group. He regularly speaks at cyber conferences and networking events and collaborates with organizations such as CBI, Willis Tower Watson's Network, and Institute of Fundraising. John is a key liaison with the Government Information Commissioner's Office and Association of the British Insurers. So John, a warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
John, as we mentioned, the topic is of very, significance, particularly in today's world, right? When we talk about cyber and cyber insurance, and especially beyond ransomware. So how has the rise of sophisticated cyber threats beyond ransomware influenced the evolution of cyber insurance policies, and what new coverage options are emerging to address these challenges? Especially, when we look at the awareness front, that what the end users must be aware of in this area of coverage.
Yeah, well, in recent years, particularly in the UK, we've seen a rapid evolution of cyber insurance. So I've been involved in arranging this type of cover for 10 plus years. And back in the early days, no one had ever heard of ransomware. It wasn't really a thing. And the coverage was geared around purely third-party liability. So the risk back then was potentially you harming somebody else's computer network and them taking legal action against you for the harm that you've caused them. Now, back then, no one really paid much attention to cyber insurance. They didn't see much value. But obviously in recent years, and particularly in the last 5 years, we've seen the advent of so many different things that have increased cyber risk, not least of which is ransomware and the huge impact that's had in terms of global threats to computer networks, but also just how connected we all are now, how reliant all businesses and organizations are on their computer network. And particularly in a post-COVID world where more people are working more remotely, that attack surface has grown considerably. So as a result of that, what we've seen is insurers trying to evolve their insurance offering, trying to expand that fairly basic cover that existed 10 plus years ago into something that's now fit for purpose for the threats of ransomware and other sort of threats that exist in the cyber world that didn't before. Now, what this has actually led to is, at this point, a market that's still evolving, and in terms of the policy cover, that is continuing to evolve. But we've seen actually a shift in emphasis. So most cyber policies are fairly broad now and are designed to pick up what we would describe as a third-party risk. So a business or organization's own financial damage as a result of a cyber event. Third-party liability, so where there's a data breach, for example, the cover would apply to claims that come from those affected third parties against the insured organization. And particularly, most areas around the world will have some sort of regulatory framework around data and data security. In the UK, there's a lot of talk about GDPR. and in a data breach, particularly a larger scale data breach, then there's a concern there that there could be action taken by the regulator. So all of these things now are adequately accounted for within the insurance coverage that the market is generally offering for cyber insurance. But what we have actually seen more action and more efforts in recent years by insurers has been to try and improve all of the things that sit alongside the insurance. So what I mean by that is greater emphasis on threat analysis, threat monitoring. So if you bought a policy that includes those elements of service, then you could expect to receive warnings whenever there's a heightened threat globally or locally or against your organization particularly. But also insurers will provide risk assessment. So where there are vulnerabilities within your own network that you ought to be aware of, insurers are now seeing that as a valuable sort of element of the cyber insurance offering. Beyond that, and this is where we found, particularly in the UK, cyber insurance has diverged from traditional insurances. There's as much emphasis on claims response as there is almost on the value of the insurance that's in force. So in the event of a major cyber event, obviously there's lots of different things to be thinking of. There's the legal elements, there's the data restoration, IT forensics. In the case of ransomware, there's the need to potentially negotiate with the ransomware gangs and other threat actors. So there's lots of different services that need to be called into action, and insurers in the UK cyber insurance market have really put a lot of effort into building cyber incident response teams, whether that's in-house or outsourced. And that's something now where insurers are using that as a way of differentiating themselves from the competition. And certainly that in the UK, that's unusual, because most of the comparisons that we'd be making from one insurer to the next would be purely based on the cover that's being offered, rather than the claims service being just as important. I mean, obviously it's important that an insurance claim is going to be paid, but because with cyber events there's more of an urgency and immediacy, then the quality of the insurer really shines through if they've got a good incident response offering. So I think that's where we've seen more of an evolution. That's where we've seen the market evolve and have focused their attention. But the threat has sort of evolved in addition to that in other areas that we haven't necessarily thought about before, going beyond ransomware, and insurers are focusing on making sure that the cover they're offering is fairly robust when it comes to things like social engineering based frauds. So that's still a thing, and electronic funds transfers are remaining a threat to lots of businesses and organizations. And more recently, there's been more of a focus on looking at the supply chain and vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And that's something we haven't really paid much attention to as an industry before in the cyber world. But when the supply chain and somebody being hit in the supply chain can have such a knock-on effect on so many different organizations, then clearly that's something that insurers and insured businesses are now paying far more attention to. So there's a lot going on, and that evolution continues to take place. But at the moment, things are fairly positive, and in terms of the combination of cover and the quality of insurers involved in the market, this is as good as it's ever been, really.
So is there any specific insurance covers or policies available, or is some sort of an umbrella cover that really comes in big picture?
Yeah, so generally, if an insurer is offering what they describe as cyber insurance, then it will be a standalone policy, and those standalone policies are pretty comprehensive. So there's an expectation now that if you're buying a standalone cyber insurance policy, that it will cover the third party liability, the first party cover, the regulatory response, cybercrime, or at least have the ability to have those as insurable options. So providing you're buying a standalone cover, then most of those type of policies, certainly amongst the quality insurers, are pretty comprehensive. Where there is more of a concern, and it's not so much of an issue more recently, but in previously it's been more of a concern, is where cyber insurance or some watered down version of cyber cover is being offered as an add-on to some other class of insurance. So historically, there may have been a computer insurance policy covering physical hardware, where the insurers may have given some form of cyber insurance type cover that's sat alongside it. And in those instances, those covers just really weren't fit for purpose, weren't really giving particularly adequate levels of cover or indemnity limits. But there's been a real concerted effort within the UK insurance market to for insurers to certainly avoid any inadvertent cover. So under those non-cyber policies where they were accidentally giving cover because they hadn't previously excluded it, then there's been a lot of tidying up, and insurers are saying, no, we're not giving any accidental cyber cover or inadvertent cyber cover. If you need that cover, you have to buy a standalone cyber policy. So I think we're
Right.
at a really reasonable, good position now, certainly in the UK, that there's a more mature standalone cyber insurance market that's relatively sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what we have seen within that market, and I think this is probably more interesting, certainly from an Insurtech perspective, is that the insurers who are involved in the cyber insurance market fall into one of two camps. They're either Insurtech led and have got quite sophisticated Insurtech led underwriting systems that are carrying out risk analysis, risk assessments behind the scenes. And those insurers are helping simplify the buying process. And then in the other camp, you have insurers who are operating in quite a traditional way and are underwriting in a way that I would consider to be traditional or old-fashioned, but it's where an underwriter is actually being presented with written risk information, thinking about it, and trying to apply traditional underwriting processes and rating procedures. And those two different approaches in the market. One is far more streamlined and efficient than the other, and that Insurtech-led offering is now more obvious and emerging more in the UK market than ever before, and we're seeing that distinction
Yeah.
making a more of an impact.
I think it's a very, important insight, particularly for the business users, especially, the kind of coverage is available and how it can really align to the needs. So thanks for that insights. So, moving on, John, what are some key considerations for businesses looking to enhance their cyber insurance coverage beyond ransomware, particularly in light of the increasing frequency and complexity of cyber attacks?
Yes, well, there's now more of a focus, and certainly the advice that we give as brokers to our clients is looking at the business interruption element of cover. So previously, most of the focus would have been on just the immediate impact of malware or a data breach, and people just really focusing on what would be immediate financial impact, what would be the cost of rectifying the impact of a cyber event, without giving much thought to the ongoing business interruption element of that type of event happening. So, for example, if computer network is fully disabled, inoperable, and that business is out of action for a period of time, then clearly there's a need there to have adequate business interruption cover in force. And now there's more proper thought given to how much cover is needed, how long that cover needs to be in force for. And that's really been quite a useful discussion to have, because it's led to people thinking about their own business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. And in the past, there probably hasn't been that much thought given to that from a cyber perspective. Most businesses would have focused on what would happen to the business in the event of a major fire or a flood or something happening of great consequence in the physical world, but probably hadn't really thought about the consequences of a major cyber event, like ransomware, for example. So it's really making businesses think about that and think about how they can mitigate the risk, how they can manage the risk, and also when we think about insurance, how that risk can be transferred. So I think that's been, probably the biggest consideration for a business when they think about the coverage that they're considering and any cyber cover that they've currently got in force. Because that's where, when we think about ransomware and what insurers are paying in terms of claims, if the insurer isn't paying the ransom for whatever reason and are dealing with the restoration of the network, there's always going to be a business interruption element. These things tend to take time to be fully rectified, and that's where focus on that consequential loss cover is really valuable.
And I think, of course, for business interruption, we normally have a curated kind of a policy that covers such risk, right?
Well, that in the past, when it comes to business interruption, that would always have been part of someone's their property damage cover. So you'd be covering your business premises. There'd be then a section in your policy covering business interruption. But what most people didn't realize until recently is that that's only covering physical perils, and that isn't designed to cover cyber risks. So in order to be insured for business interruption, it has to be covered under your standalone cyber insurance policy. And that's a message that we've been delivering to our clients consistently for a number of years now, because it's a common misconception. People think that's insured separately, but it isn't. It's covered under cyber insurance, and it's necessary under the cyber insurance policy because that ties in with all of the other elements of the claim that are all being dealt with concurrently. And that's important, that you have one insurer dealing with the business interruption and all of the other parts of the claim following a major cyber event.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Talking about this particular coverage, normally businesses, when they foresee some sort of a risk, and that's when they really take steps to kind of evaluate options to buy any insurance policies to kind of cover such foreseeable risk, right? So if you look at the concept of really, prevention is better than cure kind of a thing. So in what ways can organizations leverage cyber insurance as a strategic tool beyond mitigating financial losses, such as improving cybersecurity posture and fostering a culture of cyber resilience? So it's really not when you really have the need, at least in the foreseeable future, you really go and evaluate the options. But beyond that, if you look at how exactly can you create that, culture of cyber resilience and ecosystem?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point, because what we've found recently is that insurers, through their experience in the sort of claims that they've seen, have really raised the bar in their expectations on minimal levels of security that any organization needs to have in place. And I would say that, particularly in the UK, the cyber insurance market has probably done more than any other sector to raise cybersecurity standards, cybersecurity awareness, and driven through a culture where businesses need to make sure that lots of different elements of cyber risk are accounted for. So if basically as a business, if you're applying for cyber insurance and you haven't got a good cybersecurity posture, then insurers aren't going to offer you cover. And where people feel that they are exposed and want the cover and need the cover, as indeed most people should take that view, then insurers have said, look, if you're not doing this, this and this, then we're not going to offer you cover. And that's really forced people to sit up and take notice, because they've thought, well, I've not been in this situation before. Usually if I apply for insurance, even if I'm not doing things particularly well, someone will still offer me cover. It will just perhaps cost a bit more. But they're now in a situation where insurers are saying, look, you're doing things poorly, you need to make improvements. Until you do that, you're not going to be able to buy cover. So it's forced businesses to sit up and take notice. It's forced businesses to focus on a variety of different areas that it became obvious they were really weak in the post-COVID world. So what we saw obviously through various lockdowns, particularly in the UK, where people started working remotely and that attack surface expanded quite rapidly, is that a lot of devices that were connected to networks just weren't properly secured. There wasn't much in the way of protecting remote access through pretty basic things like multi-factor authentication. Insurers have really addressed that, and that's now almost a minimum standard for businesses now. They need to make sure that remote access is properly secured. So they've made a big difference there. Insurers have driven a culture of risk awareness amongst businesses to the extent that they are expecting businesses to be able to train their staff, or at least give them basic awareness on things like phishing and the signs of phishing attacks, etc., and recognizing that. But also insurers have sort of forced people to think about the culture in general around data security, getting businesses to understand what data they hold, how it's secured, how it's backed up, whether backups are properly secured, whether they're going to be capable of restoring data in the event of something like a ransomware attack. So it's really helped focus businesses on what the key elements of cybersecurity and what good cybersecurity posture looks like, in a way that we never expected the cyber insurance market to be driving that. The expectation was always that businesses were getting proper rounded advice from their IT advisors and their general security advisors and lawyers, etc. But in actual fact, we found that apart from a few exceptions, a lot of businesses were being advised in quite a fragmented way and hadn't really joined the dots in the advice that they were giving, and they were perhaps thinking about the legal side of things separate to the data security side of things, and that in turn was separate to the operational technology side of things. So insurers have really helped bring all of those various different areas in focus in a way that people have got better insight into where the risks truly lie. And because the insurers have got their own claims data that they can use to say, look, we know this is the area where businesses are vulnerable because this is where we're paying claims. It's been really useful, and it's been helpful to people that want to buy the cover but just don't know whether they're actually in a good place or not from a security point of view. Insurers have also gone one step further, and those Insurtech-led insurers are producing risk assessments at the quotation stage. So if you're a business applying for cover, then there are insurers who will carry out free of charge a scan of your internet-facing network, and that sort of non-invasive scan will quite often demonstrate whether the network is in a good shape or not, whether it is fairly well protected. You won't give an assessment of the business culture and the general cyber hygiene, but it will give a good snapshot of where improvements could potentially be made, or if there are any sort of real red flags and some real vulnerabilities on there. So again, it's another area where insurers are really helping. But this is the first time in all my years I've come across insurers really driving through that sort of degree of change. Normally, insurers are quite reactive, but this proactive stance that they've taken has really helped certainly build better cyber resilience within this country and for businesses that are looking to be properly insured.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an end-to-end kind of culture, from processes to procedures to policies to practices that businesses must look at if they really want to understand and successfully build a robust culture of cyber resilience, and of course the overall building of the posture. With that, John.
Exactly.
Absolutely. With that, John, fantastic discussions, and thank you for sharing your thoughts today. A true delight to have you as our guest.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And lastly, to wrap this up, thank you for listening to the Insurtech Story podcast. See you at our next episode. Take care and stay safe. Goodbye for now.